again to reintroduce Professor Huang from National Taiwan University, Department of Political Science, to be the moderator for this panel discussion.
Thanks very much. So we have, again, 40 minutes for the entire session, and so I think I'll invite each presenter to say maybe a few words, maybe 2 minutes, and then we'll open the floor for more questions. So maybe we can go in the reverse order, starting from Professor Huang. Oh, sorry, it should be Professor Rieger. Very good.
I just talked for like the longest time, so I'm just going to pass it. If I have to pass, I vote for something to talk about. I want to talk about split ticket voting.
All right.
Okay. I just want to say that welcome to Taiwan, and our country is in a very unique status. And think of the ethics in global governance, which is a new publication I'm going to have in recent days, and you cannot miss that.
Again, just to say thanks for the invitation to be here today. A particular note to my students in the audience today to take the opportunity with whatever remains in the afternoon to, and this goes to everybody who's not from the University of St. Thomas, to engage in a conversation and ask real live local folks if what they heard today made sense, or if they think the same ways about political life here.
Based on the law, we cannot talk about the poll within 10 days before election. So I just, present, the government, especially ruling party, change of policy and the current last year's change in domestic, and Hong Kong. And especially U.S. and China factor to understand about how people were chosen in the 2020 president election. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think my specialty is in voting behavior, but without data, I couldn't say anything about that. But I also spent 8 years in the election commission, so I'm quite familiar with the management of the election here in Taiwan, so I welcome questions on this.
All right, so I guess why don't we just start from those remaining questions that, from the previous session. And I don't know if any one of you, especially Professor Rieger, would like to weigh in to answer those questions.
Actually, I would love to hear, do you think there will be a lot of split ticket voting? Do you think a divided government is possible?
Oh, I think yes. I think yes. The reason is that the proportion of party identifier totally are decreasing. So the majority of people are not identified with either major party. No. And then also the rise of small parties also increase the probability of split voting. And I guess what you said about the young voters, I think it's true. It's quite similar from what I observed among the youth groups, and they probably have different opinion with quite different from us, older generation.
And so, Hans, what happens if there's divided government? That was the second part of Bill's question, was what happens if there's divided government on the, how does that affect Taiwan's ability to interact with the U.S.?
That's a good question, Shelley.
It's Bill's question.
Well, that's the remaining question from Will.
Thanks, Shelley. Well, so with regard to divided government, I think we might start having questions again about Taiwan's kind of mixed constitutional structure and foreign policy powers, the president versus the premier, and the role of the legislature in that. Now, with regard to Will's question about the mercurial nature, I'm assuming you're talking about the American president. Yes. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think there's an initial reaction to kind of wonder how Trump fits into the classic rational actor decision models that we see throughout international relations theory. And so, Trump is often characterized as a transactional decision maker, not driven by a grand strategy. That doesn't mean he's not rational. It just means that his decision calculus changes given the broader context. So it's not as if he's making, I will say, emotionally driven decisions. The way he communicates his rational calculus might be very emotional and mercurial, but I don't think it defies being placed into a rational actor model. But then if you think, well, Trump might change his mind at some point midstream. Well, every American president has gone from Chinese engagement to backing away, showing signs of positivity to Taiwan, but then circling back to Chinese engagement by the end of their term. With exception, I think, of the Obama administration, we didn't have that coming back together moment, and we have this kind of continuation. So changes in Trump's attitude or position towards China won't reflect necessarily irrationality. There's plenty of precedent for it. I think there are just the larger forces at work, and this kind of being pushed towards being fixed in a more aggressive towards China mode, and not having the option for those kind of rapprochement moments. I think that's going to really keep the actors hemmed in now.
And other people, do you want to address those issues, like split voting?
Say something about the polarization. The reason that I'm interested in this split ticket voting and the possibility of divided government is that, and this is really, Professor Huang's presentation was really subtle, but it's important, I think, to see how narrow the differences are between these two political sides, and yet how deep the gulf is in terms of how people identify politically. So like on the policy front, there's very little difference. It's really hard. I think if I were just here for the first time, I would not understand the difference between the different groups that feel threatened. And I think that's probably intentional on your part. There's a very narrow room for maneuver for any Taiwanese government. And yet, we have political parties that characterize one another as really radical. So they're both they're both operating in the space between 4.5 and 5.5. Yet they call each other 0 and 10. So what worries me about divided government is the possibility that the president, whichever, let's say Han Kuo-yu is the president and it's a DPP majority in the legislature, or the reverse, that the president is trying to keep the needle right at the center. And the legislature can't allow it, even if it is the right call, and it is aligned with their preferred position, but they can't accept it because they have to preserve this partisan combat. That's scary to me. Like that you can't just be doing the right thing because the political spectrum has been kind of misrepresented as so polarized and extreme on the ends that the legislature would be unable to support the president pursuing an appropriate policy on a matter of existential national importance. That's what I would like to hear. Maybe if you have thoughts about it. So, how about you?
Is it for me?
Yeah.
Right. I do want to jump in, but I guess before that, let me maybe accept a few more questions than that.
Yes, so my name is Andrew Frank. I'm with Dr. Stockton's group. I actually had a question that kind of tied into all of you, but more specifically towards Dr. Ritter and Dr. Huang. I'm a Russian American, so I actually grew up in Russia and spent my teenage/adult years in the States, so I kind of see both sides of it. One thing that I'm curious about, one thing that I've been seeing in the talks here, pertaining to Dr. Huang and your mention with the new generation, do you believe that this radicalization that you just mentioned, where both sides one side wants to declare they're 0, the other side declare they're 10, do you think this radicalization of both parties might drive the newer generation to seek a newer party that might be a bit of a moderate, or actually sit at that middle needle, as you mentioned? Thank you.
So I was wondering regarding the KMT leading youth who reported being unwilling to vote for Huang. One thing I've noticed is in the United States, midterm and local elections tend to be based on voters' party lines. For a presidential election, the voters tend to look more at the personality of the candidate. And one of the sayings is it's more about the person than the platform. Is there any similarity to this in Taiwan, or is it a relatively rare phenomenon that somebody votes for a presidential candidate against their own party lines?
Hello, my name is Cynthia Cole, and I have a question for Dr. Ritter. In regards to the 5th generation study, you had mentioned that almost everyone identifies themselves as explicitly Taiwanese. However, they do acknowledge their history from the mainland China, and are even actually skeptical about going to work there or even studying there. And that made me wonder if the reason why they explicitly also identify as Taiwanese is perhaps because of the negative connotation that may come with identifying as even Taiwanese Chinese or explicitly Chinese, because it seems like with the growing tensions that there may be a negative reflection if you do identify. And I was just curious if that may be a factor.
My question is, I think probably for Dr. Stockton and Dr. Huang mostly in the IR field. Going forward in the next decades, what is Taiwan going to need to do to navigate the international field to maintain breathing room and to maintain independence, or at least maintain status quo? And how will that be impacted, or I should say, how do you think the democratic nature of Taiwan will impact that, meaning that the Taiwanese government is responsible to the voters and is going to have to take that into account in a way that the PRC does not. I think this is an issue that's also brought up in U.S.-Chinese relations, right? The PRC maybe doesn't have to blink as soon in sort of these tense conflicts because they don't have to respond to polls in the same way. So how does the democratic nature of Taiwan going to impact the options and the strategies that the Taiwanese government can use to navigate the Chinese issue?
I have 2 questions. The first is easy to ask. It's for Professor Ritter. In your focus groups, you seem to have a great opportunity to not just get answers, but to get anecdotes from your respondents. And I wonder if regarding the question of their reticence to go to the mainland, if there are any anecdotes that they've told you of people they know who've gone and had bad experiences, or is it a general feeling of reticence? The second question is harder to ask, but it stems from a confusion. I've heard my own confusion A couple of people have mentioned the reduction in diplomatic relations around the world towards Taiwan, recognition of Taiwan, and the blame has been placed on Tsai Ing-wen, and I'm confused about that. It seems to me that Taiwan doesn't have a lot of agency in this aspect, and I'm wondering why she's getting the blame instead of China getting the blame. Which goes to another question that I have specifically for Dr. Huang. Dr. Huang, you seem fairly confident in Taiwan's defense prowess and economic power. The two things you showed in your slides call those into question. One was the cartoon of the missiles aimed at Taiwan, and I'm wondering why you have confidence in Taiwan's ability to defend itself in the face of the enormous potential military threat from China. Also, you mentioned you had a nice chart of future economic trade blocs in the Pacific, which exclude Taiwan. And I'm wondering about your confidence in Taiwan's economic prowess. Does that extend into the future? Because it seems like a pretty daunting task ahead of Taiwan in that respect. Thank you.
Our way down. Yes, we've won a different party, but it's really hard to get a new party in this system because it's predominantly majoritarian presidential, and the 73 out of 113 legislative seats are elected in winner-take-all districts. So it's like a two-party system, and when people try to start third parties, they just spin their wheels because they can't get past that huge high threshold. So that's why so much of the action is within the parties. People trying to reform the KMT to make it a KMT that the next generation could actually vote for. It's a good brand. Is it personal with Han Kuo-yu? That's a great question. I think it is a lot of personal. I think a lot of the reason that young people don't want to vote for Han Kuo-yu is that they find his demeanor and affect offensive. Whereas a lot of older voters love his sort of plain-spoken, swear word flinging, he tells it like he is, he says what he really thinks, he doesn't hold anything back. Some voters really like that. Young voters in Taiwan really do not like that. But I don't think, and this is a soft assessment, not a strong assessment, but based on my conversations so far, I think it's more than that. I think it's also that they associate him with all the things they don't like about politics. They think he's kind of corrupt. They think he's kind of a goofus, like kind of incompetent. They think he's kind of a jerk, like an obnoxious person, like an arrogant person. They think he's dishonest. They think he's conservative, like conservative in his values. And so it's not just that they disagree with him on cross-strait policy, although many do, but it's more like the total package just adds up to your annoying uncle that you have to tolerate, but you would never, ever, ever put him in charge of anything. So it's pretty personal, but it's not just one thing. It's the total Han Kuo-yu package. Does Chineseness have a negative connotation? Another fantastic question, actually, and one that, if I were starting over now, I should ask that question, right? I think the answer is yes. So we have had some situations where a person in the group has said, I call myself Chinese. When they ask me that survey question, I say Chinese, I picked that one. And then they have a conversation about why no one else answered that way and what the underlying rationale is. And the vibe I get in that moment is less that it's because China is bad. We have negative feelings toward China, so to call yourself Chinese is like affiliating yourself to something negative. And more, it's not cool. It's really uncool to call yourself, who calls themselves Chinese, like old people think. So and there's a kind of interesting, almost curiosity in the room. Really? You call yourself Chinese? Seriously? So I think it's less the negativity toward China, but why I love that question is that if this negative feeling toward the PRC continues to deepen, then it might begin to be like more of a hostile thing. So in one of the groups recently, a woman said, you guys, there's nothing wrong with being governed by the PRC. 被中国统治, she said, nothing wrong with that. And they didn't jump on her, they didn't attack her, they didn't shut her down, they were just like, we find that very hard to agree with. Why would you say that? So you know, you can still even go that far, but how much longer? I don't know. And then anecdotes about the mainland. It's often like a friend of mine was shopping and all of a sudden she realized that, you know, her landlady knew where she, it's always surveillance related, and it's typically phone related. It's like these little light bulb moments when they realize that they're being watched in the mainland. So, and that, and of course the other ubiquitous anecdote, which is somebody in China found out you were from Taiwan and then they just started yelling at you because they need you to understand how you're supposed to live in the world and what you're supposed to allow them to do to you. So those are the kind of anecdotes.
Okay, seems quite a few questions are directed to me. So I think Andrew, right? Your question is very good, and I do have seen quite a few small parties trying to occupy the medium way in Taiwan politics. Now, maybe some of you know that the party led by the current Taipei City Mayor, Ke, is probably going to take that place to become the medium force influencing Taiwan's politics. But because of the campaign strategy of BPP that is directed at Taipei City Mayor, so all of a sudden, the party led by the city mayor has become more blue party, more pro-unification party. All of a sudden, I don't know why. So I know and I believe that there will be an influential third party in Taiwan politics, but you know, its influence might not be as big as some people expect because of this party line or pro-independence, pro-unification line in Taiwan. So easily, people use dichotomy to categorize his party as, oh, he's more pro-unification, he's more pro-China party. So I don't know how influential that third party will be, but it will be there as a major actor in Taiwan politics. International space of Taiwan. You know, it's very tricky to say that, you know, Taiwan is a democracy ignored and excluded by the mainstream international community. But even the U.S., you know, the official statement of the U.S. is still that, if I may interpret your policy, Eric, that you know, U.S. support Taiwan's meaningful participation of Taiwan in international organizations, which is not based on statehood. That is, if U.S. support Taiwan's participation, not necessarily under the official title, not necessarily as a sovereign member, but we, U.S., are going to support you to participate somehow, some way in important organizations. That is why a lot of organizations in which Taiwan has participated do not recognize Taiwan or Republic of China as a sovereign country. Sadly, even during the past administration, my administration, we participated as an observer at World Health Assembly under World Health Organization. We participated in International Civil Aviation Organization as the guest of the chairman of the council. none of them, represent Taiwan as sovereign state. However, I think that's why our viable diplomacy at that time worked. At least, as I said, we can go there, present ourselves, mingle with others, so that people know, hey, you're from Taiwan, and hey, this is the contribution you have made to our organization. Now, I think that's, of course, we are not satisfied with that, but that is probably something that we can gain through U.S. support, through the backing of the mainstream international community, so that Taiwan can be present in some of the major international organizations. We want more, but probably not now. And also, I urge you to think, if American President Donald Trump can meet with Kim Jong-un of North Korea twice, why not he can't meet President of the Republic of China, the country he doesn't recognize officially? Right? Of course, people say, hey, that's Beijing. Beijing doesn't want America to meet with Taiwan president. Yes, but what about high-level official exchanges? You can do that. And now your Congress has passed a law, Taiwan Travel Act, which actually asks the U.S. executive branch to consider sending high-level officials to Taiwan. We haven't seen any. We have seen some assistant secretary level official or deputy secretary level officials of the U.S. to Taiwan, but probably we expect more. That shows U.S. support for Taiwan. And that's why I use hypocrisy and indifference. U.S. has been one of the most daring countries in the world that support Taiwan, that support the existence of the governments and the people on the island. But we need more. So I think it will be very difficult for Taiwan in its future international space. But we, plus those who support us, should work together to expand Taiwan's international space in the near future. And what about democracy? Yes, I think Taiwan's democracy always works and is one of the most successful stories in Asia. But we also have to look at the real politics in international relations. So, as I said, I worked for Taiwan Foundation for Democracy for 2 years, and I know how much our democracies can go for Taiwan's foreign relations. But there's a limit. There's a limit. We still have to look at the political and economic and military foundation of contemporary international relations, so that we can find a niche for Taiwan to move on. And the reduction in Taiwan's diplomatic allies, yes, some people blame Taiwan for that, but I have to say, we always blame Xi Jinping. We always blame the PRC government, because since day one, and do you know the Republic of China was the official member of the United Nations since day one to 1971? So we were having the advantage at that time, trying to exclude the PRC from mainstream international organizations. And we succeeded with the support of the US, Australia, Japan, and other countries. And then it turns that, we lost our edge by being unable to participate in most of the international organizations and by losing our diplomatic allies year after year. So Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist government is always the one to be blamed. But sometimes, especially the blue people blame Taiwan for failing to maintain the current condition of Taiwan's diplomacy. That is, if we, for example, when Ma Ying-jeou stepped down in 2016, we had 22 allies. At that time, we tried to maintain that number. We tried to have meaningful participation in international space by establishing stable, progressive, and prosperous cross-strait relations. We know that mainland China might have some purposeful goodwill towards Taiwan. And we try very hard to get rid of those ill intentions of the PRC towards Taiwan. That somehow worked. So if Taiwan can try her best to maintain cross-strait relations, as former President Ma did in the past 8 years, then I think the blame on her will be less and less. And finally, Taiwan, the gentleman said, I'm confident in Taiwan's national defense, I'm confident in Taiwan's economy. I want to say I'm relatively confident because we are facing a huge threat across the strait. And that huge threat is some threat that almost no country in the world can resist. So our national defense is important because, as I said, and I want to reiterate it again, we need our strong national defense to enhance our confidence in dealing with Beijing. Without strong national defense, Taiwan will be just like a small tiger without teeth. Small tiger without teeth. So we need strong defense. And economic power is always the most important factor for Taiwan to present itself in the international community and for Taiwan to continue to grow, not to mention to buy weapons from the US. So I want to be confident in Taiwan's national defense because we have some troops of high quality, although the number of the high quality troops is not very big, and we have continued supply from the US, and also we have money to buy them. And in terms of economy, we have this entrepreneurship, in Taiwan's businessmen, so they want to take some risks to run for profits. And also, so far, cross-strait economic cooperation hasn't suspected. That is, economic cooperation framework agreement signed between Taipei and Beijing in 2010 is still working. So, and Taiwan's new southbound policy on its economic front has progressed a little bit, and Taiwan's economic interaction with the US has improved as well. So I hope that Taiwan can maintain its economic robustness so that it can feel confident, it can regain its momentum to progress regardless of what is going to happen in the future.
So first, you'd asked how Taiwan will navigate to maintain the status quo in the future. The corollary seemed to be how will democracy then shape Taiwan's future? I think the answer is found if you flip those, because I'm confident that it's actually the democratic process and the decisions made by Taiwan's electorate that inform the government as to what the realm of the possible is. Now, we always celebrate the pragmatism of Taiwan's voter, and that doesn't seem to have changed. Even with Shelley's focus groups with the newest voters. And so, if Taiwan moves in one way or the other towards reunification or independence, the big actors in the room are going to have something to say. And so maintain the status quo, wait and see. The thing is, and not being from Taiwan, it's easy for me to say. I don't have to live in that continued fuzziness, and there is that. So just like Dr. Rigger mentioned about the third parties, right? The mixed member majoritarian system, and this is where I could really start to ramble.
I know.
And I need my calculator. But so basically, it creates a system, like Dr. Rigger says, in which you've got a two-party system, and darn near guarantees the emergence of majorities after each election. The list system, the PR tier, allows for diversity, third parties, that kind of thing. And third parties are actually common to Taiwan. You'll have two or three, or maybe even two or three at least. We'll win a small number, 3, 4, 5 seats in a given election, but they tend to be 2 to 3 election flashes in the pan. They make a big splash, and then the seat levels will decline after that. Now, when third parties or new third parties in Taiwan would actually matter, thanks to Shelley, the title of your book, anytime I say will matter, it's just, it was perfect. So if you have a situation in which you don't have a majority party, and you need to form something like a coalition government, then a third party will matter, right? And then whatever that third party reflects might actually be incorporated into some sort of policy. So under Ma, you're right. If I could just respond to that part with Taiwan's participation in IGOs as an observer or some other non-state membership status. During the Ma administration, ICAO, the World Health Assembly, there was a lot of progress. There was one really big condition, and that is that Ma Ying-jeou accepted the 1992 consensus. When Tsai Ing-wen was elected, she refused to accept the agreeable language of the 92 itself. Okay, she rejected the 92 consensus, and all that went away. So the only way Taiwan's going to get back into those observer positions in IGOs or elsewhere is if the president accepts the 92 consensus. I am disappointed in the lack of higher level American officials visiting Taiwan. The one sign of hope, I guess, from last year was that the directors of the NSAs for Taiwan, the Republic of China, and the United States did meet in D.C. That was the first time since the change in the relationship. And I think you can't walk down a street in Taipei without bumping into Assistant Deputy Secretary of State in a given month. Those visits don't seem to be as uncommon as they used to be. But again, we need higher level visits. I'm confident in that. Oh, so the $1 million question. Gambling during the election is illegal, or gambling about the election is illegal, so I'm going to need to be careful here. I was thinking about that while Shelley was betting you all millions of dollars up here. If you're curious about scenarios, then right now, so people are kicking around back and forth. After the election, would Donald Trump call Tsai Ing-wen with a congratulatory phone call? Or after Trump's, if he gets reelected, would he accept a congratulatory phone call from Tsai? If one of those happens, this is just crazy talk, right? Then within the 4 years of Trump's second term, and relations between the U.S. and China continue to go down the toilet, would someone of a much higher ranking from Taipei get an invite to visit D.C. and the White House? Those are the kind of the canaries, the spectacular canaries in the coal mine.
Would you like to say something?
Me?
Right.
Okay, I think about the future of Taiwan economy. I think if Taiwan can take advantage of this new international environment, that means for my personal view is U.S.-China trade war will continue. And so that's been Taiwanese businessmen will move back to Taiwan because they are afraid of the worsening situation, worsening trade conflict between U.S. and China, and worsening the more uncertainty. And then Taiwan, as this year, we can see our export market will become strong, especially the high-tech industry. And then as to the if U.S. can sign FTA or negotiate FTA with Taiwan, that will help Taiwan increase our confidence. I just mentioned in my presentation. I think the coming election for Taiwanese will choose the pro-China or pro-U.S. because the last year the Xi Jinping speak about Taiwan. I will be very afraid of Taiwanese, and the China push Taiwan to more pro-U.S. So I just mentioned you cannot blame the reduction of Taiwanese diplomatic country reduce it to Taiwan. Not in China, it's very clear. Taiwan policy is very clear. They don't want to provoke China. They want to just make spectacles. And because the Chinese, pushing and so, of course, that is the Chinese strategy. They want to cut the Taiwan's, the supporting rate. And so, for me, it is very clear: is we can blame the PLC. We cannot blame the President Tsai.
Some final words.
Okay, I want to add a point to the issue of split government. Okay, it's just my personal observation of the situation is like this. Before 2004, there was a mechanism of inter-party conference or negotiation to achieve consensus in the law writing process. Actually, but after that, the mechanism just wrong. Yeah, I think that's very important because if the mechanism still exists, those legislators they can do the business pragmatically, and compromise are quite easy to achieve. And also there is institutional change also have an influence. Is that the legislature changed the rule about inter-party negotiation. That's official negotiation to settle the difference among political parties. They require that the whole process had to be televised. That's created a problem, That's make those legislators, they just stick to their party line, and they want to compromise. They don't want compromise. That's okay. I guess that's an obstacle to the split government.
Thank you. I'm afraid we've run out of time, and we do want to have a photograph of our panelists before they have to